everybody. My name is Pat Kane. I want to thank you for joining us tonight with the Museum of the Grand Prairie and the Champaign County Forest Preserve District for a special virtual edition of our popular annual program titled Maple Sugar Days. Typically, we host this program in person at Homer Lake Forest Preserve right here in Champaign County in Central Illinois, but due to the pandemic, we are trying out a virtual edition for the first time ever. So I want to thank you all again for joining us. Again, I'm Pat Kane, Public Programs Visitor Services Coordinator with the Museum of the Grand Prairie, part of Champaign County Forest Preserve District. I want to especially thank John Garvey, who you will meet in just a few moments, volunteer with us for helping with tonight's program, who typically helps each year with this awesome annual event, Maple Sugar Days. Before we get into tonight's program, I did want to go over a few housekeeping items, some upcoming events, and some other things related to the Museum of the Grand Prairie and Champaign County Forest Preserve District. So first and foremost, let us know where you are watching from. If you haven't done so already, we always love to know where everybody is tuning in from each one of these programs. So let us know in the comment section down below where you are watching from. Ellen is tuning in from Blue Mound, Illinois. RW tuning in from Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. Beth also tuning in from Pennsylvania. Diana tuning in from Mahomet, Megan in Royal, Illinois, Carolyn tuning in from Naperville, Lynn tuning in from Iowa, Inez tuning in from Chicago, Nancy tuning in from Pennsylvania, Michelle, hey Michelle, good friend, tuning in from Champaign, Myra tuning in from Cicero, Illinois, and Lisa tuning in all the way from Louisiana. So thank you so much to everybody for tuning in tonight. Really appreciate you letting us know where you're watching from. Another point, if you have questions throughout the program, also feel free to write those down below in the comment section. A question may pop up in your head. Write those in the comment section down below. A little bit about us, if you don't know anything about us. Museum of the Grand Prairie opened originally as the Early American Museum in 1968. And our current mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the cultural and natural history of Champaign County in East Central Illinois. We're part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, which is a collection of 7 forest preserves, educational facilities, golf course, Kickapoo Rail Trail, and much more right here in Champaign County, where we try to connect our community to nature and encourage many connections with the natural world and the cultural world as well. Few upcoming programs with the museum and the Forest Preserve District. Going on right now until the end of February is our first ever CCFPD snowflake search. We've hidden 30 snowflakes throughout the Champaign County Forest Preserve District that have been beautifully and creatively painted with all sorts of colors looking like snowflakes, and they are hidden again throughout Champaign County Forest Preserve District. We're encouraging you to go out and try and find those in the wintertime if you're looking for an excuse to get outside. If you're local here in Central Illinois, go and see how many snowflakes you can find, and then snap a picture of you with them and post it to social media using the hashtag CCFPD Snowflake Search. Tomorrow is Abraham Lincoln's 212th birthday, and to help celebrate, we are having a special visit with First Lady Mary Lincoln herself. Pam Brown will portray Mary Lincoln and put on a special program titled Stories with Mary, a virtual visit with Mary Lincoln, tomorrow, again, on our Museum of the Grand Prairie Facebook page and YouTube page. So check that program out tomorrow morning. Help us celebrate Abe Lincoln's birthday, our 16th president. Help us celebrate his birthday tomorrow, Friday at 10 a.m. Last program I want to let you know about is we have another program in our Garden Speaker Series coming up 1 week from tonight, Thursday, February 18th at 7 p.m. With a large amount of time everyone is spending at home these days, the theme for this year's Garden Speaker Series is How to at Home, with programs focusing on how to garden in various ways within your own home or on your own properties. Ken Robertson of the Illinois Natural History Survey and Jack Zinnin of the University of Illinois Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences will present an engaging virtual program titled How to Use the Diversity of Native Plants in Your Own Garden. Again, that program is 1 week from tonight, Thursday, February 18th at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. For more info about Museum of the Grand Prairie and the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, check us out on all of our social media pages or visit museumofthegrandprairie.org or ccfpd.org. Again, just want to let you, or I want to ask you to let us know where you're watching from down below. Got a few more people tuning in. Kyle from Champaign, John from Pennsylvania, Patty from Rantoul, Ashley in Chatham, Kimberly from Germantown, Wisconsin, and Jody from Mahomet. So people tuning in tonight from all over the place. So really appreciate you all tuning in. And again, if you have any questions during the course of the program, please write those in the comments section below, and we'll answer questions at the end of tonight's program. I also wanted to bring on John Garvey before we get into tonight's program. Introduce you guys to John Garvey. Let me pull John in real quick. There's John. Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah. So John is going to help us with tonight's program. Him and I are going to tag team tonight's program. To introduce John to you all, John, again, as I mentioned before, is a volunteer who helps us with this program each year. John teaches French and computer literacy courses at University High School on the University of Illinois campus in Urbana. And also, John has been tapping maple trees in his own backyard for years to make maple syrup for himself and his family. And he's going to talk a little bit more about tree identification and how you could tap these trees and process your own syrup in tonight's presentation. So with that, again, we're going to get into tonight's program. So I'm going to share my screen really quick, and we're going to go ahead and get going with tonight's program. So bear with me just for a moment. Oh, whoops. Okay. Come on. There we go. Okay, so Maple Sugar Days, the virtual edition. Going to get into tonight's program. Going to talk a lot about the history behind maple tree tapping, science behind it, and then also get into how you can tap trees of your own to make your very own maple syrup in tonight's presentation. So breakfast, I don't know about you all, but breakfast is by far my most favorite meal of the entire day. And breakfast would not be complete in many cases without maple syrup on top of some pancakes, some French toast, some waffles, what have you, like is pictured here. So we're going to talk about that important breakfast staple tonight, maple syrup. Going to talk about maple trees, got some bark showing up there on top of the pancakes. Going to talk about how you can identify maple trees. Again, going to talk about the history of maple tree tapping, how long it's been going on, who has been tapping maple trees, especially in this area. And then lastly, as we already mentioned, how can you tap some trees of your very own to make your own maple syrup? So brief history of maple tree tapping. We can go into great detail about this, but just briefly, maple sugaring is unique to North America. So even though Europeans, they also have maple trees in Europe, the climate that we have here in North America, especially where we live and other parts of the country that have similar climates to where we are in Central Illinois, makes it a great place for maple tree tapping. The reason for that is, we'll talk about a little bit later, is we have typically here in this area in late February and early March, the Goldilocks conditions, the perfect conditions to tap maple trees. And those perfect conditions need to be consistent days where we have the temperature above freezing, above 32 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and then dropping below freezing at nighttime, below 32 degrees Fahrenheit at night. And when we have those conditions, those temperature conditions happening day after day, it really opens the door for maple tree tapping to take place. It's the best time to do that. And typically here in Central Illinois, when we see that is late February, early March. So the reason behind planning this program for tonight, February 11th, is even though right now in Central Illinois, it's pretty dang cold. It's been cold for quite a few days in a row. Right now would not be the best time to go tap some trees. If you go put a tap in a tree right now, you're not going to get anything. But the idea is that once it starts to warm up here in hopefully a few weeks, where we get those Goldilocks conditions in late February and early March, you will be able to go out and tap some trees if you want to make your own maple syrup. And again, that climate is great here in North America, especially here in Central Illinois. And Native Americans have been tapping maple trees for centuries, especially in this area, long before European settlers arrived in North America. Native Americans use maple syrup not only for sweetening, but as sustenance and even in as a form of currency, maybe bartering with some maple syrup to trade for some other things that Native Americans may have wanted from other European settlers or other Native American groups. How was maple syrup discovered? So most historians who have studied this topic believe that Native American groups introduced maple sugar and syrup making to Europeans. That's a good consensus of those who study this topic. However, there is no firm proof or written record to completely prove this theory. However, there are a number of legends out there and stories behind when Native Americans discovered maple syrup. And I wanted to read you one of these stories that I typically read each year at the Maple Sugar Days program. So this is a Native American Iroquois legend about the discovery of tapping maple trees to make maple syrup. So it goes as this. So the first maple syrup maker was believed to be an Iroquois woman, the wife of Chief Waxies. One late winter morning, the story goes, the chief headed out on one of his hunts, but not before yanking his tomahawk from the tree where he'd thrown it the night before. On this particular day, the weather turned quite warm, causing the tree's sap to run and fill a container standing near the tree trunk. The woman spied the vessel and, thinking it was plain water, cooked their evening meal in it. The boiling that ensued turned the sap to syrup, flavoring the chief's meal as never before. And thus began the tradition of making maple syrup. That's one Iroquois legend. As people normally ask at this program each year, how did Native Americans figure out that you could put a hole into a tree, sap would come out, and you could heat it up for a long period of time and eventually have maple syrup? One Native American legend goes like that for the discovery of maple syrup. So how did they do it? Before metal spiles that John will show you a little bit later, and sugar shacks, Native Americans would make a V-shaped cut into the tree, and they would insert, as it's pictured here, a hollowed out reed or branch, basically like a wooden straw, into the tree. And then underneath, like it's pictured here, they would take birch bark buckets or other containers to collect large amounts of sap, because it takes quite a large amount of sap in order to make maple syrup. You have to collect 40 ounces of maple sap from the tree, heat it up for a long period of time, boil it down, create a whole bunch of steam. You have to collect 40 ounces of maple sap to make 1 ounce of maple syrup. So you have to collect a large amount of sap to do so. And Native Americans did in birch buckets using these hollowed out reeds and branches shoved into trees. And then, as I just mentioned, you have to remove all of the water from the maple sap to leave more and more of the sugar content behind, leaving you with that syrupy consistency. So how do you do that? How do you remove the water? And without boiling, without metal pots, how did Native Americans do it before they ran into some metal pots that they may have traded with other groups? Well, one option is using the method known as fractional freezing. So this would be a method that was used before metal pots, or I guess you could use it if it's your preferred method. So as we see in this picture here, there's a large amount of sap collected in this tree container, this hollowed out log. And what would be done is overnight, you would leave the buckets of sap out to partially freeze. The water freezing, rising to the top, and then leaving the sugar down below. And then you would remove the ice, remove the water from the sap, and then continue this fractional freezing process until you're left with a higher concentration of sugar and syrup that is left over in the birch bucket. So as I mentioned in the morning, they remove that top layer of ice, and after several days, it would take quite a long time, the remaining sugar would be left in the bucket, in the container, that looks more and more like syrup. Another method that Native Americans used before heating it up over an open flame in something like a campfire, Native Americans would also heat up some stones, make them very, very hot, and then put them in a container, much like this container here. So as I mentioned before, Native Americans are believed to discover maple tree tapping and maple sugaring and introduce it to Europeans. Here is an image of a sugar shack that European settlers would create, and these sugar shacks would pop up all over central Illinois and other regions in North America with similar climate to here in central Illinois. And these sugar shacks would be these places where you could collect a large amount of sap and heat up a large amount of maple sap in order to make maple syrup, large amounts of maple syrup. And this photo was taken by Frank Sidoris, Illinois, the namesake town. And this photo is housed at the Illinois State Museum that Frank Sidoris took of the sugar shack in 1910. So that's just a brief history of maple tree tapping. And now we're going to get into a little bit of the science behind it. So I talked a little bit about why maple tree tapping here in central Illinois typically happens in late February and early March, because most often, historically, we see the Goldilocks conditions, the perfect conditions for maple tree tapping, where it's above freezing during the daytime and below freezing at nighttime. But what exactly is happening with those trees throughout the year? Well, we're going to watch this short video that will describe a little bit about that process.
Typically being associated with late winter and early spring, it actually starts in the warmth of the summer. You see, while some of us are on summer vacation, the maple tree is hard at work. Using massive amounts of water from the roots and the process of photosynthesis in the leaves, trees are continuously converting carbon dioxide into carbohydrates, or sugar. Because, like us, they use these carbohydrates as fuel throughout the year. But also, like us, the tree knows that the peak production during summer won't last indefinitely. Because come winter, the temperatures will be too low to move that much water. So like a wise homesteader, the tree saves up its excess fuel and stores it for future use. In autumn, once its season of fuel production is complete, the tree prepares to go dormant by discarding its no longer useful leaves to the ground, where they may eventually decompose and return their nutrients to the soil. As the temperatures fall below freezing, that massive column of water solidifies in place, trapping and compressing tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide. And as they compress, it creates a vacuum which pulls up the last remaining liquid water from the roots. Then for 4 or 5 months every winter, as snow falls all around it, the tree simply rests, confident that its hard work will pay off in the spring. Because as soon as the daytime temperatures once again begin to rise above freezing, the warmth of the sun melts the water, which in turn allows those bubbles of carbon dioxide to re-expand, creating pressures which force the water up into the branches, carrying some of that stored fuel with it. This wakes up the tree and allows it to begin producing new leaves so that it can start the process all over again. And that's where we come in. Because when the tree is tapped with a spile, it creates an opening where some of that pressurized sugary water can escape. And that's why maple syrup season typically falls between February and April, depending on the location, because it's the cycle of below freezing nights followed by above freezing days, which causes those bubbles to contract and expand, forcing the sap up and down the tree. But once the temperatures settle out and the leaves begin to grow, the flow stops, and maple syrup season ends until the following spring. But luckily for us, we're not quite there yet.
All right, so we see the life cycle of the maple tree throughout the year, what it's doing in each season, and then also video highlighted again that perfect season for maple tree tapping that we're getting ready to get into here in central Illinois, where we have above freezing temperatures during the day and below freezing temperatures at night. Those conditions creating almost like a natural pump, pumping up life into the tree, pumping up sap into the tree, which could eventually the tree could be spiled and you could collect sap of your very own.
And typically being associated with late
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to John. John's going to talk a little bit about how to identify maple trees.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Pat. Um, Oops, I'm hearing myself echo. Okay, that's better. Um, Generally, most of us know what a maple leaf looks like. You should recognize that there are multiple types of maple trees. The best ones to use are clearly what are called sugar maples. I'll show you a picture of their leaves here in a moment. There are other maples that are native to around here. There are also silver maples. If you're familiar with silver maples, they tend to be very fast growing trees. They're not very strong. They do have sap. The sap does have sugar in it. They can be tapped and they can be boiled down, but in terms of overall productivity and quality of syrup, what you want to look for is the sugar maples. If you could go ahead a little bit and we could look at the leaves. Right. Okay. So you can see that there is a significant difference. The sugar maple is probably the most typical maple in a picture book looking maple leaf that you would have. Um, they uh, they have smooth edges between the lobes, and the red and the silver have more toothy edges. They're smaller, and in the winter, in the fall, the um, the sugar maples are going to generally turn a much brighter red than the other two do. But as I say, they all can be tapped. The reason I started doing this in the first place was because about 20 years ago, my wife realized I was getting restless for the garden about this time of year, and there wasn't much to be done. But we have three maple trees in my yard, and two of them are sugar maples. One's a silver, and so she got me some spiles. I'll show you what those look like in a few minutes. And I just started this without any of the science, without any really knowledge. I should back up a second because when I first learned to tap maple trees was more than 40 years ago. I was glad to see the Pennsylvania people were here because I was in college in Western Maryland in the mountains. And I had a class where we did learn to tap maple trees. It was basically biology for non-majors. And Western Maryland is not a place that you think of for being able to tap maple trees. But we were cold enough and high enough that we were able to do it. Normally, you think much more New England and Canada for that. But we're at the southern limit of where you can do it here, but it still does work. And generally, with the three trees, I can get 40 gallons of syrup or 40 gallons of sap from my trees. If you could go one more, Patrick, I think. Yeah, the other way that you recognize the sugar maple from the sugar maple spinny seeds are somewhat smaller. They tend to fall further from the tree than the silver maple because they are smaller. They can fly further. But this also requires you to plan ahead. If you're looking in the summertime, you have to look in the summertime for when the leaves are. A little slightly higher version of recognizing the tree. If you do a little bit of research, you can find the barks of the different maple trees are significantly different too. So if you want to use that as an identification, that's also possible. So that was my brief introduction to that. Pat will talk about what we actually have available as a facility around here.
Yeah, so at Champaign County Forest Preserve District, when we do this program each year, we typically do it at Homer Lake Forest Preserve because there is a historic 200-year-old maple sugar grove where we host these programs each year, where maple trees have been tapped for over 2 centuries there. And then here's a picture of that maple sugar grove. As you can see, of course, there's a group of us gathered around a fire where John is sharing all of his wisdom about how to make your own maple syrup. And then you can also see some buckets. Some trees are tapped here, some buckets, some pails, collecting some sap from these trees. Eventually, that will be heated up to create some maple syrup. Here's another picture, just to give you an idea of what the maple sugar grove looks like. As John was mentioning, another way you can identify these trees is if you're really good at it in the wintertime, you can identify them by bark. I've got quite a few maple trees in this maple sugar grove at Homer Lake. And we got, we have this program each year and show people how to tap trees of all ages, and visitors of all ages how to tap their own trees. And then here's John around the fire talking about the processing phase at Homer Lake Forest Preserve. And I believe that's what John's going to talk about next. If you want to tap your own trees and make your own maple syrup, how do you do it? Well, John, I'll let you tell them a little bit more about that.
Very good. Okay, so you've identified the trees, and the amount of equipment that you need is relatively small. Really, the most specific, sophisticated thing is a spile. I don't know if you can see me holding it up, but the spile is at the top there. But these are my spiles. I have 4 or 5 of these. I'm zooming out on my camera. And they come specifically made so that they will fit easily into a hole that you bore into the tree with a hook that hangs down below so that you can hang a bucket for them. When I first started doing this, I did not have a powerful enough battery powered drill, so I had to carry a long extension cord to my the trees in my yard with the regular old electric drill. But since they've gotten better and I have a more powerful one, now the significant thing you need is you have a picture of a 5/16, 17/16 drill bit. I generally use this type. If I can hold it up a little closer, I use a spade bit type because it drills a nice clean hole relatively quickly. You can use any kind of drill bit, but it should be no bigger than ½ an inch. Mine is ½ an inch. And you drill it in about, well, we'll talk about that in a moment. Buckets are there for collecting the sap. If you look up even amateur maple syrup making, you're likely to find people who use if they have multiple trees, if they have a small forest of their own. There'll be a lot of people who use spiles with tubes connected to them, which will collect in a large tub or a large bucket. That would be very handy. But I use the small bucket. I have basically just these paint buckets that I bought at the hardware store, and they fill up on a good day. They will fill up several times. I think that's a 3-quart bucket, and it fills up several times. And so, even though it seems very daunting, if you actually hope to get, as Patrick said, it's 40 to 1. You start with 40 gallons of sap, which kind of is a lot. You will end up only ideally with a gallon of syrup. We never get that much. I'll get a couple quarts on a good year. But you're just constantly collecting the buckets and dumping them into a larger holding bucket. And I usually wait till I have 10 gallons or so. And then I start the hammer, by the way, the pictured hammer is really just to gently tap the spile into the hole that you drill in the tree. And it's a very rite of spring for me every year when I drill the first hole and tap the first spile in, and that first drop that comes out, and they start to pour immediately. If you've got the weather right, and if you've got and the conditions are right, they don't wait to start dripping. Sometimes it's very satisfying. They'll start gushing. And now I say that, and I keep wanting to back off. If you're at all concerned about any damage to the tree, don't be. As long as you don't over tap, and we'll talk about the numbers of holes you can actually do in a given tree. The tree heals itself very quickly. Before the summer comes, the holes in my trees are healed up, and it doesn't show any lasting damage to them at all. You don't do it in the same place. You rotate around the tree every year a little bit, go up a little bit, go down a little bit. So it's not in the same place. But the amount of sap that you're taking from the tree, relatively speaking, is negligible. It is making lots more for itself and using it all. So, I can see how we want to think about the poor tree that we are making suffer, but it does not suffer. And yeah, so could you go on one slide? Let me see what the next one is. Right, okay, so you would drill a hole, angle it a little bit so that there is a downward slope in the hole, so ultimately the spile is dripping into the bucket, not straight out. It will work if it's straight out. This is not hard science here, but it does tend to make it a little bit better. You only want to go about 2 inches in, but most of the time your drill will only allow you to do that anyway. The spile is going to fit in place, so you're not going to do damage if it goes further. Could you move one more, please? All right, and that's what it looks like when the spile goes into the hole. they are made so that they are basically little funnels, and they fit in tightly into the hole so nothing leaks around them, and then you hang the bucket from that hook. And the next slide. Now, this shows relatively. I've never tended to worry about this because my trees, I'm happy with one hole per tree. But if you get thicker and older, we could do this in the maple grove. Several of them would easily take 3 taps without even showing any wear. Because some of them are quite old and some of them are quite big. A maple tree, I just learned this today, a sugar maple tree can live a long time. Some of them are 300 or 400 years old. Not the ones we have around here, I don't think, but there are ones up in Canadian woods that are that old. So multiple taps is possible if you wanted to if you have a large tree and you wanted to maximize your production. Okay, move along one more, please. All right, and as the sap pours into the buckets, you collect it. Now the buckets that we have out at Homer Lake, they are slightly larger, and they do have the advantage of having little covers made for them, so that one of the disadvantages of doing this is the weather can be very variable. It can rain, it can snow again, everything could freeze up, or what was the least pleasant is towards the end of the season, it starts to get warmer and everything is coming alive and everything is coming out. And so you start to get insects interested in this very mildly sugary water. For us, it looks absolutely clear. If you rub your hands in it, if you dip your fingers in it, you'll get a little bit of a tacky feel, a little stickiness to it. But you would really have to be a very creative imaginer to taste it and think that there was any sugar in it at all. At the first thing, but the bugs like it and the animals like it, so having a cover for it is really helpful. But generally, I mean, I'll mention this in a few minutes, but I do a lot of filtering, so anything that does fall into it, rain is not going to be dramatically a harmful thing. If it freezes, it melts again. So there's a lot of nature happening when you're doing this. Okay, go on ahead. Well, all right. So as you pour the sap into your buckets, I have several large, as I said, 5-gallon collecting buckets, and I fill a couple of those before I start doing any cooking. You want to filter it, whether it's for pieces of bark or animal I don't say droppings, but bits that fall from the tree. You filter all that out into the main bucket, so you have a relatively clear liquid to start with. I use a lot of cheesecloth and just a basic kitchen sieve while I'm doing this. And filtering is going to continue as you cook, but having it as clean as possible to start with saves you a lot of time. We'll see in a moment what it looks like when it's boiling down, but I'm just trying to think, do I want to mention anything else? This picture that you see here is really rather late in the stages when I'm starting to cook it on a smaller stove. Okay, next one. All right, so boiling it down. What I've changed my setup from the beginning. When I first started doing it on the back porch of my house, it was very long. It took a long time. Still takes quite a long time, but I would use essentially a roasting pan, that the type that you might cook a turkey in or something, and I set it up on a camp stove, and then just use propane to continually add sap to that. As it boils down, and it will boil down, it starts looking like you see in that pan there, but it will start to foam up. You skim off the foam. There's a lot of skimming with the filter as well. I can continue to add cups or quarts of sap as I go. And I'll just do this. It doesn't require a lot of watching at this point. I'll just set it to boil and leave it, come back in half an hour, 45 minutes, and add some more, and add some more, and add some more. It'll go on. And I'm collecting sap all the time. I can stop it at any point. Usually I'll come home from work and I'll boil sap for 3 or 4 hours until it's time to stop, and put a lid on it and let it sit for the next day. If you were doing this in any kind of professional or large scale thing, obviously you wouldn't do that. You would do everything you could all at once. But I'm a hobbyist, and it still works, and it still gets syrup. So I continue to add sap, as I say, as long as I'm getting it, and as long as the trees are producing it, I will continue to add it. I don't have to do it in separate batches. Um, Really, the science behind this is that there is sugar in this sap. Um, and just like if you dissolve sugar in water and then boil it down, the more you boil it, the more the water evaporates, the more the sugar is going to be concentrated in the liquid that you have. The more sugar there is and the less water there is, the higher the boiling point. So as it gets thicker and gets darker and gets more syrupy, um, it's gonna boil less. It's still going to be heating, but it's going to be less of a vigorous boil. So there is a process that is going on with this all the time. And then if you add more sap to it, it dilutes it again, and then you just keep doing this. My syrup tends to be a little dark, probably more dark than you would see in the store. That is not a question of quality. It's just because it has been reduced almost to a syrup state multiple times. But it still tastes good, and it still works exactly the same way as it would for syrup. Um, so let's see. So I continue to add the raw sap. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting to tell you anything. All right, go ahead. All right, and then there's a line that we usually use early on. The reason all of this is done outside, as I just alluded to, we've got 40 gallons of sap, say, getting ultimately 1 gallon of syrup. That means you've gotten rid of 35 gallons of water into the air. If you try to do this indoors, especially inside your house, uh, we always say you just lose all the wallpaper in your house. It is not a good idea to try to do any of this in indoors, except the very end, when I've gotten down to no more sap, and my the stuff that I'm boiling in the pan starts to really seem, and you taste it. You take a spoon or stick your finger in it, whatever. It tastes like syrup, and it's getting sticky. It's a little bit more syrupy than it was for all this time. Then I usually will put it into a pot and bring it indoors. Because when it gets to the end, when it gets close to the end, it's tricky, and it can go very quickly from pourable, usable maple syrup to basically sugar and rock sugar. It's not it. You can do that on purpose, but you got to be very careful. What you're doing, what you're trying to do now, is to get it. If you've done any kind of candy making or caramel making, anything of that sort, you're trying to get it to the about 230 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the syrup stage. If it goes more than that, it will start to crystallize, and it won't be useful as syrup. It'll taste good, be lovely if you wanted to just have sugared maple, but at that point you need to stop it, and then probably I would filter it one more time. There's probably been 3 or 4 filters in this stage too. A lot of the reason the filtering happens at this point is not because stuff has fallen into it, but because you're dealing with an organic substance that's come out of a tree, and there's a lot of sedimentary minerals and other things that are in there that are just natural to the thing. One of the reasons people say maple syrup is actually a relatively healthy thing to use is that it has a high volume of magnesium in it, which is not typical for other sugars that we use in our diet. Um, there was a time when people were trying to sell bottled sap on the basis that this was a healthy alternative to water, simply because there was a low quantity of magnesium in it. But you are filtering out. There's a term they use for when you get towards the end. It's called sugar sand. There's a silty grit that accumulates in the bottom of the pan, and that is just what's coming out of the sap. It's just reduced from as the sap reduces, it comes and looking for the word. It is just sediment. So let me see if I have anything else I would like to tell you at this point. Okay, nope, that's it. And I'll answer questions. And when we're done, I hope that was at least a little bit helpful. And I do want to reiterate, I went into this knowing nothing. The internet has, in the meantime, caught up with a lot of information, and I can look stuff up. The spiles that I have, I bought online. That I have replaced the original ones because they've been around for a long time. But otherwise, there's no sophisticated equipment. I use a bigger propane burner than I did in the first place because it cooks faster. And I would love to have enough firewood to do it over a fire. That would really be ideal and much less expensive. Um, but it keeps me busy. This year has been frustrating because we were kind of hoping that there would be something happening already, but absolutely not. Last year was interesting because it was very stop and start. We had some cold, and then we had some warm, and then we had some cold, and we had some warm, and that's okay. If it starts to freeze during the day, it will stop, but it also will start again. If it starts to get warm at night, it will also stop, but if it then freezes again, it will start again. So as long as you have that cycle going, it will keep going for a while. Sometimes I will be doing this for a month. Sometimes it's only a couple of weeks, but it's worth it in the long run. Not for me. I don't like maple syrup, but I like to give it away. So it has proved interesting, and it something that I can do on a regular basis. Okay.
Well, thanks, John. I know you've got quite a bit of experience doing this. Just as you said, you're a hobbyist, and and doing it. And I always find it uh, interesting that you just said you don't even like maple syrup, but you're such a nice guy that you make it for everybody else. And I know that before you've used it in cooking too, adding
I
it
like
like
to cook.
and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. So,
It's good in whipped cream.
what'd you say, John?
I said it's good in whipped cream.
Oh yeah, certainly. So as I mentioned before, we typically do this program in person, and try to, have some maple syrup on hand that you can try at the end of the program. But of course, we can't do that since we're doing it virtually. But where could you buy maple syrup in Central Illinois, locally made? People going through this process that John was just talking about. Where can you buy it in Central Illinois? If you're not in Central Illinois, check to see if there are any local processors in your area. Maybe there's some people who make their own maple syrup in your area, have some sugar shacks around. Check it out. Do a quick Google search and see if that exists in your area. Here in Central Illinois, there's a handful that I was going to mention. Close by in a neighboring county, part of Vermilion County Conservation District, over at Forest Glen Preserve, they do a similar program. They have maple sugar days. They tap maple trees and make quite a bit of it to sell, and I think sometimes they give it away. But I believe they're doing in-person programs over there this year. Of course, with COVID protocols, masking and social distancing and all of that sort of stuff. But reach out to Vermilion County Conservation District and see if you'd like to go to an in-person program. You can go to one of their maple syrup programs, or even purchase some maple syrup from them over there. Also here in Central Illinois, not too far from us, about an hour away in McLean County, close to Bloomington Normal, Illinois. Notable syrup place, Funk's Grove Pure Maple Syrup, is a popular syrup processing location here in Central Illinois. And notice the spelling is different from normal spelling, with an I instead of a Y. John, do you know why that is? I remember hearing about it, but I can't quite remember the exact reason why.
Honestly, couldn't tell you. I thought it was, a deliberate anachronism, but I have no idea. It's not
Yeah,
because it's French.
yeah.
French would be OP.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was, I can't remember if somebody said it was the original spelling of syrup or not, or what, but I don't know exactly. But Funk's Grove Pure Maple Syrup, check it out. I know that this time of the year, when they have made syrup, it sells out pretty quickly. So get your hands on some Funk's Grove maple syrup, because it is quite popular in this area. I also saw, I don't have it in this presentation, but Macon County Conservation District in Decatur, they're doing some maple syruping programs this year as well, in person, again with COVID protocols. So if you're in the Decatur area here in Central Illinois, go check out Macon County Conservation District and their maple syrup programs. Lastly, since John told you everything you need and what you need to do, if you have some maple trees, tap them in your own backyard and see if you can make your very own maple syrup. since we gave you all the tools and all the steps tonight. So with that, that's the end of our presentation for making maple syrup of your very own. And I want to thank John for helping out with the program tonight. And if you have any questions, as I mentioned, and as it says at the bottom of the screen, write those down below. We'd love to answer some of your questions. I'm going to do some moderating of the chat here to see which questions we have coming in. So Leslie asks, I think you went over this, John. Will the sap start running later this year due to the cold spell?
Oh yeah. It as soon as it starts to thaw. I was looking at the weather. We're still locked in for at least another week. But as soon, at the end of February, beginning of March, I'm going to get restless and probably. I was starting to think we had a warm middle of January, if you remember, and I was almost going to test it then, but I decided not to, and I'm glad I didn't. So yeah, it will start. It will always start. It just whenever it starts to thaw.
Mary is asking, I believe she means to say, does it hurt the tree if you take too much sap? And I think you addressed that a little bit in the middle of the presentation, as far as how many spiles to put into a tree. But John, do you think it'll hurt the tree if you take too much sap? I mean, especially a younger tree, probably wouldn't want to tap it too much, but.
No, and if it were younger and you try to do it in multiple places, you'd probably get to the part of the inside of the tree, the core of the tree, where there's no xylem, so it's not gonna work anyway. But no, I don't think so. And if you're thinking in terms of overall length of time, it's self-limiting. It's not going to. I'm fairly confident that these trees can take it. My trees have not going to hurt.
Leslie asked, do you have sugaring events that are open to the public? So as I mentioned, we typically do this program every year in late February, early March. But of course, with COVID this year, we decided to just do it virtually. But, check back next year in 2022, we'll do these programs again. And as I mentioned before, if you're in Central Illinois or if you're local, check out Vermilion County Conservation District or Macon County Conservation District, as I know they're doing programs in the area this year. Of course, space is limited and there's COVID protocols in place. So you may want to look into that information. Or, if you're not in Central Illinois, chances are there might be other conservation districts or forest preserve districts or local syrup processors who may do similar programs. So just take a look around and see what you can find. But check back with CCFPD, Champaign County Forest Preserve District next year, and hopefully we can do it then. Kara asks, what happens if you don't skim the foam off in the processing phase? John, do you know what would happen if you didn't do that?
That's an interesting question. I mean, nothing ultimately. You could certainly still consume the thing. It would just be a little bit less pleasant. I think it would be cloudier. It's not going to hurt you. Nothing that's in there is toxic or anything. It's just you want to have as clear a liquid as you can because we expect the syrup to be clear. But it's also a way of tending to it. It's not that time consuming. I'll do that once or twice an hour while it's cooking, so it's not that
hard. Jan is asking about the sugar sand that you talked about. Is that something that you would discard?
Yeah, that gets filtered out when you're passing it through the cheesecloth as well. It's fine, but it's not that fine. And it's as I would pour the syrup as it's cooking through the cheesecloth, then it's gone. It's not sugar. It is not. It doesn't taste good.
An interesting story here. A friend tapped a sugar maple tree located in a city and was sad to taste it since the syrup tasted like sewer. Oh boy! Apparently the roots were wrapped around sewer pipes. Well, that brings up a point too. And another question that people typically ask at this program each year is, why maple trees? Why tap maple trees? I mean, can you tap any tree, or is there a reason why you tap maple trees? I know that maple trees have some of the highest sugar content out of all the trees that we have, especially in this area. But John, do you know? I mean, can you tap any old tree, or or what?
Yeah, certainly most deciduous trees will have sap. They may not have much sugar. The one that I hear periodically mentioned, we have a large hackberry tree in our front yard, and I know that hackberry has been used as, I don't think it's very pleasant, but I think it was used as a medicinal syrup as well. So that's possible. I wouldn't want to mix them though. You'd ruin the sugar maple.
Yeah,
That story about the sewer pipe, I'm going to probably steal that and pretend that I knew it in the first place because I love it.
yeah, I guess, the tree is what it eats, so
Yeah, yeah,
um, I've also heard black walnut trees, maybe tap those.
yeah.
I was talking to another staff member today. She did say not to tap a cherry tree because of harmful
Yeah.
materials in there. And Barb and I were talking today about, well, you're not supposed to eat the pits of stone fruits like cherries and
Yeah,
peaches
perhaps. Yeah,
for similar reasons. So
I think they
um,
have a small amount of arsenic.
yeah, yeah.
Cyanide,
Denise
cyanide.
Denise
Uh,
asked, do you drill the hole at an up angle? Yeah. So, yeah, John, I was going to ask too if you could
Pretend
show.
this dresser next to me is a tree. I would drill that way. Not that, probably not that much of an angle like that, and then the spile. It would work if you drilled it, so that the spile went at an up angle, but it wouldn't pour out. It would take more trouble for there's not a lot of pressure coming from the tree. There's a little bit of capillary action to push the liquid out, but it's more just gravity. So you want to help gravity by the angle of the spile coming out of the tree. These are good questions.
Yeah.
Also, hi, Mary Margaret. I didn't say hello to you before. This is a very good question. One of the things that I had to learn kind of the hard way is it will go bad. Um, it's best to keep, you're processing it, so you figure that it's also kind of pasteurizing it in some way. If I keep it refrigerated, it will last for long, long, long years and years. If I don't, it will gather. I don't know if it's organic matter or if it's just sediment that's still settling in it, but there will be, it will get ruined if I leave it out on the shelf for more than a year, say. So I just always refrigerate everything that I make.
Anne has a story. I used to live in Canada. I remember going on a field trip in fourth or fifth grade, learn about maple trees. We got to taste maple syrup on fresh snow, real life snow cone there. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, this is I was going to say the one good thing about doing this way this year is normally on a maple syrup day I will spend 8 hours outside um, next to a lake, and the lake has been frozen solid on some cases, in snow sometimes, mostly in a lot of mud, because this time of year it can be very variable. But when there is snow, the idea of pouring almost complete maple syrup on fresh snow is just lovely because it will crystallize as you do that as well. And that is a very Canadian thing when you go to the sucrerie.
Anne also asks, well, she says, thank you. I learned a lot today. Is it acceptable to try and tap a sugar maple tree from a local park?
I think
I would, you can't, at least at CCFPD, you can't come and tap our trees without permission, of course, but I would make sure to get permission from wherever if it's not your own tree. But if they've tapped the trees and made their own maple syrup, as long as they've done it honestly and responsibly, I would say it would be trustworthy to try. So
I've heard, especially, well, I know in Urbana, there have been neighborhoods that have kind of done this as a co-op, so that all the maple trees that were like in common from the people that were in the neighborhood, they did it. That's a very good idea, but apparently it's also very hard to manage because somebody has to be in charge of the boiling, and you can get everybody to collect it, but then when you're actually doing the thing, who has the responsibility? Um, I mean, I like doing it by myself, but I could see if there was a bunch of people with, 10 or 12 trees in a neighborhood, you would be able to make quite a good bit and
yeah.
share it all. but parks, I wouldn't just walk into a park.
Yeah. Yep. And as I mentioned, over at Forest Glen County Preserve in Vermilion County, they have a maple grove, and they have an event each year. This year, so not too far away from us here in Champaign County, they're doing that over in Vermilion County. Well, that seems to be all of our questions. I appreciate everybody for asking questions. Those were good questions, as John mentioned. I appreciate John. Again, thank you for helping with this program this year again virtually. And thanks to everybody for watching tonight. If you have any more questions, feel free to write those down in the comments section. We'll check them out after this program is over. Or I'll keep tabs on it and get back to you. But stay tuned for more programs. Come and see us next year for Maple Sugar Days 2022. We hope you all have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for tuning into CUI's TV. We hope you enjoyed the show. This video can be accessed anytime on youtube.com. In the YouTube search bar, type in UPTV6 and look for their microphone logo. We hope you will join us again next week for more local, engaging content designed specifically for Champaign County older adults. Take care and stay safe.